The Quadrant Model of Reality: How Patterns of Foreign Existence Reveal the Fundamental Form of Being, by Ryan Merkel. A theory is more impressive the greater is the simplicity of its premise, the more different are the kinds of things it relates, and the more extended its range of applicability. Albert Einstein. Coincidence is God's way of staying anonymous. Albert Einstein. The Quadrant Model of Reality is a theory of intelligent design stating that existence derives from a quadrant pattern. Reality organizes itself according to this pattern. The thesis of this book is that the form of existence, or the form of being, is a quadrant, which can be visualized as a cross. The Quadrant Model of Reality is a holistic model with 4 quadrants, each containing 4 squares. The thesis is that the Quadrant Model of Reality is a theory of everything. The physical nature of reality is a manifestation of the quadrant model pattern. The claim is that all phenomena derive from one principle and one pattern. Discernible reality is a shadow of this pattern and reveals it. Plato had a similar intuition, stating that the physical world is a shadow or a reflection of a true world. He called this true world the world of forms, or the world of ideas. He proposed that there was one form, namely the form of the good out of which everything manifests. However, he did not define this form. The Quadrant Model of Reality theory of everything is that the one form is the quadrant. The form of the quadrant is the same form as the cross, which indicates why the symbol of Jesus on the cross is so powerful. The cross represents the form of being, the form of existence. Jesus on the cross represents humans being at one with the form of being, allowing the illusion of separate beings, the self, to die. The one pattern expresses itself in 4 main quadrants, each containing 4 squares. A 5th quadrant outside the first 4 contains 3 squares, making a total of 19, with each square representing its own unique attributes. The first square in each quadrant is typically somewhat weird and conservative, having a sort of loner quality. It always engages in a duality with the second. While appearing to be opposites, the two are intricately linked. The second square in each quadrant is more normal and homeostatic, characteristically reflecting a concern with maintaining order and structure, keeping things clean and organized. The third square is the most physical and solid, tending to be more spontaneous and destructive. It forms a triad with the first 2. The first 3 are very similar and connected. The 4th square is strange and seems to not belong to the previous 3. Yet, by containing elements of the first 3, it encompasses while transcending them. The 4th is also mental and transcendent, and points to a 5th ultra-transcendent square, which becomes a new quadrant. Never seeming to belong, the 4th square's transcendent quality makes it seem unnecessary or irrelevant. The 5th square is ultra-transcendent. There can only be one reality, namely that which manifests the quadrant pattern deriving from the cross, from the form of existence. There can be no other existence, and nothing cannot exist, so the one thing that exists must be eternal. What exists in the present must be eternal. Since there can not be no thing, there must be something, and what exists is the quadrant existence. The logic of the Quadrant Model of Reality indicates that I must exist eternally, repeating existence eternally, because what exists now is all that can exist, and since there can be no thing, this is eternal. There are 4 quadrants. The Quadrant 1 has the same qualities as Square 1, Quadrant 2 the same qualities as Square 2, and so on. Introduction. The Quadrant Model is a theory of intelligent design. The theory states that existence derives from a pattern called the Quadrant Model of Reality. In the pattern, there are 19 squares forming 4 quadrants, with 3 squares outside the 4, a 5th quadrant. But there are 16 squares in the 4 quadrants. All things are organized within each quadrant in squares, each square possessing certain specific qualities. The quadrant model pattern is a framework by which existence is organized, not just a way of organizing existence. The first quadrant, containing the first 4 squares, is composed of sensation, perception, response, and awareness. This is a model of consciousness that I invented. Awareness encompasses sensation, perception, and response. The 4 square always contains the previous 3. Sensation, perception, and responding are all aspects of awareness, the 4 square. Awareness also points to what comes after it, namely belief. The 4 square always points to a 5th. The 5th square begins its own quadrant. Awareness, the 4th square, indicates the nature of the 5th square, belief. The content of awareness is of sensations, perceptions, and responses. That is why awareness involves the previous 3 squares. Awareness is solidified into beliefs. Beliefs are the first square of the second quadrant. The second quadrant is belief, faith, behavior, and belonging. The full spectrum of awareness is made into beliefs. Belonging is the 4th square of the second quadrant. Belonging in a group is based on having the correct beliefs, faith, and behavior, which is why belonging contains the previous 3 squares yet transcends them. But also, the group one belongs to affects belief, faith, and behavior. Belonging is separate from the previous 3, yet it engulfs them. The 4 square is always separate from the previous 3 squares, while also including them. Belonging points to the 5th square, namely thinking. Thinking is the 1st square of the 3rd quadrant and is the 9th square in the sequence of squares. The group affects the thoughts of those who belong to it. Therefore, belonging contains everything before it and points to what comes after it, namely thoughts. Because the group you belong to affects your thoughts. The 3rd quadrant is thinking, emotion, doing, and dreaming. The dreamer thinks, has emotions, and engages in doing. Dreaming includes the previous 3 squares and also transcends them. The 4th square always transcends the previous 3. When dreaming, the dreamer is paralyzed and separated from the physical body. The body is paralyzed, so the dream is not acted out. Doing occurs in dreams, but not physically, so dreaming in effect represents a transcendence of the body. Dreaming points to the square that follows, the 5th square, namely contemplation. Contemplation is the 1st square of the 4th quadrant. In contemplation, the oneness of things is discerned, and the focus of attention is on things that are beyond rational resolution, and the focus is pure and undistracted. Contemplation represents a quality of transcendence of the body ego, to which dreaming points. Dreaming contains the squares before it, yet indicates the quality of the square that follows. Contemplation. The 4th quadrant is contemplation, passion, flowing, and knowing. The 5th quadrant, which transcends the previous 4, is being, non-being, and becoming. Being is God. In the Bible, God says, I am, which is pure being. There are many examples of how the quadrant pattern manifests the form of existence. However, they all have the same general characteristics found. In the quadrant of thinking, emotion, doing, and dreaming, thinking and emotion form a duality. The first 2 squares are similar and always create a duality. The 3rd square is different from the first 2 and is more physical and related to action. The 3rd square is always the most physical and solid, referring to physical action. Following the duality is the triad. Thinking, emotion, and doing are the triad. With the 4th, the quadrant is complete. The 4th is always different from the previous 3, transcending the previous 3, yet engulfing them. The 4th square has the qualities of the squares that precede it, yet it transcends them, adding new attributes. The 4th square is among the many examples of the quadrant of how the quadrant pattern occurs. One is a standard model of particle physics. In every quadrant, there is a duality formed by the first two squares. The third component square is more physical and solid. The third aspect tends to have a quality of being dangerous and destructive. The fourth square is somewhat transcendent and strange, seeming not to belong with the previous three, yet it contains elements of them. An example in the standard model is top quark and bottom quark is the duality. Electron is the third aspect, which is related to doing. The neutrino is the fourth transcendent aspect / particle. Another example is the organization of the planets. Mercury corresponds to the sensation square, the first square. Venus is perception, the second square. Earth is response, the third square. Mars is awareness, the fourth square. These 4 planets are called the terrestrial rocky planets. Then there is an asteroid belt, dividing one quadrant from the next. Jupiter is belief, the 5th square. Saturn is faith, the 6th square. Uranus is behavior, the 7th square. And Neptune is belonging, the 8th square. These are the 4 gas planets. A third example of the quadrant model can be observed in the 4 temperament personality types: the idealist, guardian, artisan, and rational. In the Keirsey model, there are 4 temperament types. Within each temperament are 4 types, making 16 personality types in total. Based on the framework of this model, a vast amount of examples in reality will be shown to reveal how all manifest reality is organized around the quadrant model pattern. The quadrant model pattern is the framework by which existence is organized and manifests. All manifestations throughout the cosmos are representations of the quadrant model of reality. Quadrant 1. Instinctual, primitive spiritual consciousness. Top left quadrant. Sensation, square 1. Square 2, perception. Square 3, response. Square 4, awareness. Quadrant 2, magical, religious, groupish consciousness. Bottom left quadrant. Square 5, belief. Square 6, faith. Square 7, behavior. Square 8, belonging. Quadrant 3, rational, interpersonal, egoistic, individualistic consciousness. Top right quadrant. Square 9, thinking. Square 10, emotion. Square 11, doing. Square 12, dreaming. Quadrant 4, transrational, transpersonal, intuitive, inspirational consciousness. Bottom right. Square 13, contemplation. Square 14, passion. Square 15, flowing. Square 16, knowing. Quadrant 5, God, outside the quadrant. Square 17, being. Square 18, non-being. Square 19, becoming. Chapter 1. The Epiphany of the Quadrant Model of Reality. My sophomore year of college, my grandpa told me that according to a popular and respected scientific model in psychology, there are 4 types of people: thinkers, emoters, doers, and dreamers. This can be depicted in a quadrant of 4 connecting squares. Square 1, thinking. Square 2, emotion. Square 3, doing. Square 4, dreaming. I understood the meaning of being a thinker, an emotional person, and a doer, but I was not sure what it meant to be a dreamer. When I first heard this personality theory, I thought there should be only 3 types of people because I figured dreaming did not seem to belong. I did not understand what it would mean to be a dreamer. I recognized thinkers would think a lot, emoters would be emotional, and doers would be into doing things, but dreaming did not seem to fit in the model, and I concluded it was unnecessary. But then I reasoned how thinking and emotion are a duality. Thoughts influence emotions and emotions thoughts. Next, I realized how doing was intricately connected to emotion and thinking. Thoughts and emotions influence what you do, and what you do affects your thoughts and emotions. So I recognized that thinking and emotion was a duality, and thinking and emotion and doing was a triad. Finally, I remembered what my psychology professor had told me earlier that year about dreaming. She said when you dream, you think, have emotions, and do things, but you are disconnected from your body, and there is a different quality to your thoughts and emotions in what you do. So I determined that dreaming was separate, yet contained the previous three. It was transcendent to them, but also engulfed them. The pattern came to become the pattern of the quadrant model, which I recognized to permeate reality. Thinking and emotion appear to be polar opposites, but are not. They form a duality. Not really opposites, they are intricately connected and linked. Thoughts affect emotions and emotions affect thoughts. Thinking about things evokes certain emotions. The first two squares are always a duality. While at first they appear as opposites, they really are different aspects of the same process. Doing is the third square and is not separate from thinking and emotion. Thoughts affect emotions and emotions affect thoughts. In addition, emotions elicit doing. A root word in emotion is motor. Emotion means to bring to movement. So emotions bring about action, causing people to do things. Thinking, emoting, and doing are seen as separate and are usually depicted in separate categories, but they are intricately interconnected and united. Thoughts bring about emotions, emotions lead to doing. Sometimes doing is followed by thinking. At other times, doing evokes emotions. Thus, these three categories form a triad, which are different components of the same process. One does not exist without the others. Dreaming is separate from the previous three, but encompasses them. Dreaming is different from thinking, emotion, and doing, but it envelops them. The pattern I presented in this personality model is a pattern that represents the quadrant model pattern. There are four entities. The first three are very intertwined. The first two are a duality. The first three are a triad. The fourth is separate but brings together the previous three. The next day after I discovered this quadrant, I drew another quadrant. In the first square where I put thinking, in the first model, I put contemplation. In the second square where I had emotion, I wrote passion. In the third square where I had doing, I put flowing. In the fourth square where I had put dreaming, I put knowing.